and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We have been working on how to relieve yourself when you are having anxiety and depression, how to get rid of it, how to become a person that it doesn't get plagued by it anymore. And so we've been talking about that, and I want to inject this special segment, which will probably take 2 or 3 segments to do it, but widowhood. I want to discuss what it's like to be a widow or a widower, and the emphasis is on the fact that you have a couple that's married and one of them passes away, and so you are either a widow if you've lost your husband, a widower if you've lost your wife. What kind of healing can you get from that? How long does it take to heal? Can you even heal from that? Now, this is aimed mainly at people who are bonded together in a marriage relationship, and they've been married maybe for quite a few years. As usual, I've taken my sources from various books and so forth that I've read and done some research on this, but I want to introduce you to a book that's rather old. I don't know if you'd even be able to get a copy if you wanted to. It's written by Dr. Joyce Brothers, and it's just titled Widowed. Now, Dr. Joyce Brothers was a really famous and well-known, and still is a well-known psychologist. And I like her work. She does a lot of good work, and she has a lot of common sense. Now, this book is about 30 years old, so I'm not even sure that it's in print. I happened to pick it up. I happened to see it. And since I wanted to work on widowers and present that as part of my shows, I grabbed this book. It's probably the best book I have ever read on being a widow and how you get stabilized again and then go back into normal life and heal from it. It's a long process because it's a very special kind of grief. This is probably the best book I've ever read on it. It's her journey. It's her telling her story about when her husband died. And I'm going to get into that. Of course, I'm going to bring in a lot of other sources too. But it's important to remember that if you've been married, the Bible says the two becomes one. And if you're married and you've been married a long time and you have a good relationship with your spouse, and I'm not talking about a bad relationship here, the grief process, by the way, is even worse for a bad relationship than it is for a good relationship. But I'm going to say that I'm going to focus on a good relationship in one member of that partnership has passed on for some reason, usually due to illness or an accident, and then you have one member of that partnership left to face life alone. How odd that must be. Say you've been married for 40 years, 50 years, 35 years. Say you've been married for all of that period of time, and then suddenly you're without the person that you should be trusting the most, that you should be talking to the most, that you should be sharing the most with. How do you get over something like that? I think it's a special kind of grief, and it needs to have some attention because it's going to take a while for a person to stabilize and then get back to normal life again. Now, a lot of what I say will probably also be true of people who are not married but have stayed together for a long number of years. Some of the things will be true, but I'm focusing on the marriage relationship and what it's like not to have a marriage relationship, but not by choice, but because of the fact that a partner has died. And what are the things you go through, and how do you handle that? I'm going to read a paragraph now. It comes from her book, Widowed, and it's when she realizes, and it kind of hits her, that she's going to be alone for the rest of her life, unless she chooses to remarry. And I have some comments about that too. So this is what she says. There came a midnight only weeks after his death, when I was driving home from somewhere. The thought of returning to the empty apartment was more than I could face. Why go home? There was no one there, no one to care. There was no point in going on. There was no point to anything anymore. I was driving his red Porsche. It was a pitch black out, and my headlights were the only light that pitched through the night. The highway was deserted. Why not end it all? Crash into a tree. They would think I had simply lost control of the car. My suffering would be over. It was a 10-second temptation. I learned in those few seconds that I could never give up on life, no matter how lonely and how sad and how tired of it I was. Whatever life held for me, I had to face it, loneliness and all. I drove home slowly, tears streaming down my face. Now, it reminds me when my father died, and I had taken my mother shopping, and we'd gone into different stores, and I got back to the car, and she was in the car crying. She couldn't take it. She didn't have her husband anymore. My father died young of a heart attack. You know, it runs in our family. And so she was a widow, kind of a young widow, and she had to go the rest of the life without him. And he had asked her, I don't know why he ever did this, but he had asked her not to marry again. He wanted to be her only husband, but she didn't want to marry again anyway. She decided that she would always stay single. And the comment that I want to make about remarrying and not having somebody around, usually when a widow gets herself stabilized, she decides not to marry again. She was glad that she had the years that she had with her husband. She was glad that she was able to nurse him through his final illness, but she wouldn't want to do it again. It's a drag. It's painful to see somebody that you love just go out and gradually get weaker and weaker and weaker and be sicker and sicker and sicker and be there witnessing all of that as you're taking care of them. But you wouldn't want not to take care of them. You take care of them because you love them, but you see them slowly die. And that's a problem. But when they get through that grief, they decide they don't ever want to do it again. They stay single, they get used to the single life, you know, and then they make a life for themselves being single. Most men, however, are different. If a man has lost his wife or a man is single, he wants to marry again, usually. Now, this is according to her vision of this. She says they want to get married again because if they get to the point where they're ill, they want to marry somebody a little younger who will be able to take care of them as they go and get sicker and weaker. So they want to marry again so that they can have somebody take care of them. And somebody younger who will probably be healthier longer than they will be healthy. That's the thought about it. So the men want to remarry, the women want to stay single. But once you stabilize, then you're free to make the choice. You can't make the choice with any certainty when you're just going through the grief process. The grief process is too painful. Now, with Joyce Brothers, her husband died. Her husband was a doctor. They were both very active. She had a very active career, seminars, teaching, you know, all the kinds of things. She had a practice going on. He had a medical practice. He was a specialist in diabetes. He was very busy. And so they both had very active practices. But as time went on, she stopped seeing people because she wanted to spend her time with him. He had to close his practice because he became too weak to continue. He died of cancer. He had an 18-month battle with bladder cancer. And what she says in her book, and I'm not sure if it's still true now, but according to her, bladder cancer is the 5th most common cause of death among men. And half of those deaths are due directly to smoking. Due to DNA studies, they are able to track back and find out whether smoking caused the cancer or not. And in her husband's case, it did. And she says about half of the patients, half of the men that die of bladder cancer, they would not have had it if they had not smoked. It was directly caused by smoking. And he tried to stop, but he couldn't stop. There are certain addictions that are very, very hard to get rid of. One of them is smoking. It's very hard to get rid of smoking. Most people who try to get rid of smoking and try to kick the habit, they have to try it several times before they're successful. A lot of them go back to it, even if they've stopped for a year or two, they go back to it because the cravings don't stop. And it may be that the cravings never stop. It takes years to lose the cravings for smoking. And some of them just say, well, the heck with it, I'm going to do it anyway. And they go back to smoking. Even if they have stopped for a while, they go back to it. So it's a very difficult addiction in order to conquer. The other addiction, which I've never mentioned in here, although I have done seminars on it, is gambling. You know, I kind of frown whenever I hear somebody say, well, we need to have gambling, legalize gambling in the state. We need to be able to bet on games and bet on horse races or whatever. But the thing is, once you gamble and you get hooked on gambling, it's almost impossible to quit. It's extremely difficult to quit it. And so that's the second one. There are 2 or 3 that are really difficult to quit. Smoking and gambling are 2 of the most difficult ones to get rid of. So at any rate, I just want to start this off here by talking about the fact that we as human beings, we tend to attach ourselves to things, and this is normal. It's perfectly normal. So what do we attach ourselves to? We attach ourselves to our friends, our relatives, our family, organizations that we're involved with, to whatever religious persuasion that we are a part of, to political ideas, anything, to organizations. We can attach ourselves to any of those things. We need to attach. And that's natural for the human being to do that. Anyone who cannot attach themselves to people or things or organizations or philosophies or whatever it is, they have a real difficult time in life because they can't really make friends. They can't attach to people. And a lot of people end up by being mentally ill and having what's known as attachment disorders. They can't attach. So as a result of that, they do have mental illnesses from that. You know, so we do attach ourselves to things. Now, occasionally you will find a baby that's born that won't attach. They try to hold back. They don't want to be held. They don't want to be played with. They don't want to be cuddled. If anyone picks them up, they try to squirm to get away. These babies are in trouble already because it's not natural. Babies love to be held, love to be played with, love to be cuddled. This is a normal baby and will grow up to be a normal adult with normal attachments to things. If you can't attach, then how can you have friends and how can you be a success in life? It would be difficult to do that. Now, I also want to mention the fact that sometimes when you talk to a person who's grief-stricken because they've lost their husband or they lost their wife, it's difficult to know what to say that's going to comfort them. And I just want to say that most of the things that we say to people who are going through grief because of the loss of a partner, the things we say aren't helpful. What we usually say, and I want to mention this particularly, is, you're without him now, but it's all right. He'll be alive forever in your heart. You know, phrases like that. You'll know him, you know, you'll have him in your heart because you'll remember him. It's your memory that's bringing him to your heart. So therefore, because he's in your heart, you have him forever for as long as you remember him. The difficulty with that and saying things like that, and I know it's said in order to be a comfort, either to a person themselves or to somebody that they know, the problem is that a person who's in deep grief can't relate to that. They don't want them in their heart. They want them here, now, in the flesh, healthy and well, being able to relate like they always did relate. You know, so at any rate, you have to remember that saying that someone's going to be alive in your heart is not the comfort that you think it's going to be. It's aimed for that. It's meant for that, you know, and it's well-minded. I mean, it's done out of love for a person to help them feel better. But you see, I think it only reinforces the person's need and want to have the person return, which of course they can't do. So I think that that's not an appropriate thing to say for the most part. Maybe it's helpful for some people, but I'm not convinced that it's helpful for a lot of people. The other thing to remember is that memories change. 8 years out after a death, you're not going to remember your loved one in the same kind of way as you remembered him when he first died or when she first died. It's just different. The memories change. Sometimes they're sharper, sometimes they're weaker, and sometimes they're just changed and you don't remember things as they were. So to say to have a person is forever in your heart, that's not the same thing as remembering them as they were, because the memories themselves will change. You know, I saw something on the internet, and I meant to copy it down, and somehow it got waylaid, but I'm going to just, from the memory that I have of it, this is the way people really feel when a loved one has died, a husband or a wife. And it goes something like this. I won't get it exactly right because I'm just doing it by memory. But it says, the person who wrote it, and I don't know who wrote it, said something like this: death changes everything, time changes nothing. I miss you. I miss your voice. I miss the wisdom that you had in your voice. And I miss you just as much now as I did the day that you died. Time does not heal. Time is nothing. Time changes nothing. But the death, that changes everything. I miss you still. Now that's, I think, a much more accurate rendition of what people go through when they've lost a spouse in death. I think that that's much more realistic. This business of I'll always have you forever in my heart, I think that that's misleading, and I think that the problem with it is that they'll want the person back more. I don't think it gives a comfort. I think it reinforces the need and the want for the person to return in a healthy state. That's just my opinion, and you know, maybe you disagree with that, but that's all right. But it's something to consider when you're talking to a person. I remember when my brother died, and I was in deep grief. I was very close to my brother. The person who helped me the most said the least, and what she said was significant. She said, "When you hurt, I hurt." Now, there's a statement of compassion. She's not trying to fix it. You can't fix it. There's no way that you can fix it. She's not trying to make it better by saying something that's comforting. She's just making a compassionate statement. I'm with you. I understand a little bit what this is like. And even though no one can ever understand perfectly well what another person is thinking or feeling, you can, because of shared experiences, have some kind of an idea of what a person is going through. And so the simpler, the better. So let's go on, and I want to talk more about the death of Dr. Joy's brother's husband. He was a smoker. She said that he smoked like a chimney. He just couldn't get over the smoking. And as a result of that, he had the cancer. And he was basically a healthy person until the cancer hit. And his cancer was due to smoking. And he tried to quit, but he couldn't quit. And finally probably just gave up on it. And so therefore, he just went on and he gradually developed the cancer. She started to give up some of her practice. She had some advantages that other people don't have. A professional person who has a situation like this usually does have advantages that other people don't have. One of the advantages she had was the fact that she had no financial problems. No financial problems because she had a very active practice. She could go anywhere and give seminars anywhere. She flew all over the world giving seminars. She had her own practice. She could always get back to it as much as she wanted to. So there were no financial problems. That was a real asset that she had that a lot of widows don't have. She also did not have any young children to depend upon her, so she didn't have to care for 2 or 3 little ones. You know, she had a daughter, and the daughter was grown up and married and had her own family, so therefore there were no small children involved. That made it easier, too, for her. And so she had that kind of an advantage that other people don't have. She had no money problems, no children to worry about, and she had a very active career. career, which she could always go back to. I imagine a lot of people, a lot of women, they're dependent upon their husbands, they're staying home, they're taking care of the family, some of them work, but some of them don't work, and then the husband dies and they're left like a widow. And then what do they depend upon? They have to find a job. They have to maybe change houses. Maybe they can't afford the rent anymore, so therefore they have to find another place. It's not easy to be a widow in today's society. Not only do you lack the funds that your husband brought in, but at the same time, your social element changes. According to her, you have less social impact and less prestige if you're a widow than if you're married. For some reason, your social relationships go downhill, partly, I think, because people don't know what to say. So how do you get to feel better? How do you get well from this? It's a long, long struggle to do that. And I think she says, and of course I'll be talking more about what she says in her book, but she says that it took her about 1.5 years, and then she realized that she was getting well. Now, when I do funerals, I do them a little differently than I used to do them, and I still do funerals occasionally, even though I'm retired. I take a little section of the funeral toward the end of it and talk about healing from the grief. Funerals are interesting. A lot of people shy away from them. They think it's going to be so emotionally painful to go through that they don't want to go through. And a lot of people just decide not to have funerals. However, a funeral, if well done, can be very, very helpful to the healing process, can get a person reoriented, can give you the closure that you need if you're in that kind of a situation, if it's well done. So I kind of class funerals into 2 categories. The well-done one, in which you have a lot of hope when you end, and the funeral really does do what it is supposed to do, bring closure, bring hope, set you on a new path, and the other kind being terrible. The worst funeral I went to was less than 5 minutes long. The people, I knew the family fairly well, they sat down and says, no, we've decided we're going to go out for ice cream after this, so let's make it short and quick. So the person who came in to do the funeral, who was a priest, okay, we can make it short and sweet, then we can all go out for ice cream. And he didn't do anything. He didn't touch on any of the issues of how do you stand when you think you're going to fall apart? How can you get strength if you think you don't have any? He touched on nothing like that. And he says, well, this person is gone and we're going to miss him, but we'll keep going, we'll have a good life. And he said a short prayer and said, okay, it's all finished, we can all go out and have ice cream. And that's what they did. They all went out and they had ice cream. I think they were so grief-stricken that they didn't realize what a funeral can do for them if it's well done. And they certainly didn't have a well-done funeral. It was just short, 5 minutes, it's done. And that's no way to have a funeral. You don't want it long. My funerals that I do would never be long, but there's a little thing at the end where they tell them how they know that they're healing from the grief and giving them the assurance that they can heal from the grief, because it is an ongoing process, but it can be done. Well, we're getting short of time, so I'm going to close it here. And we'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.